Today we're going to be talking all things tempo run, from what is a tempo run to how fast you should be running your tempo runs at, and most importantly the biggest mistake that all of us, including myself, make when it comes to tempo runs. What is up guys, Andy, FOD Runner here, out in a beautiful, stunning, hot, humid and getting dark very quickly FOD, so hopefully the light isn't too bad. I found the lightest place on the trail to record this. So today is all about the tempo run. Today I've been inspired to make this video because I have a tempo run, 20-minute tempo run on my plan today, and it kind of made me want to talk about the tempo run a little bit more because it's something I absolutely love and don't do enough of, if I'm honest with you. But of course, as I said to you, there is one big mistake that we all make when it comes to tempo runs, which I'm sure you all know, but we'll talk about at the end. And more importantly, for me, it's to explain to you a little bit more about the tempo run and how you can get your bang for your buck when it comes to putting these into your plan and your training regime. But before any of that, and before it gets too dark, we're going to hit the trails here. We're on the cycle trail. We're going to be heading that way for about 20 minutes. 20-minute tempo run. It's going to be undulating. Fingers crossed we get through it all right without seeing any wild boar. And of course, the most important thing out of all of this is to stay controlled, calm and relaxed whilst working hard. So before we dive into anything and I take you back inside to discuss everything about tempo runs, I need to get this done. I'll see you when we're done. 20-minute tempo run done, and look who we bumped into.
Hello.
You might see on my Strava that I was a bit back and forth in the last miles because I bumped into James and said to him before we went out tonight, if I see you, we'll do an extended cool down together, because we don't run together anymore. Ever. But by the by, tempo run done. Back to explain a little bit about more. Back to explain a little bit more about the tempo run. So there we go, tempo run complete. Absolutely delighted overall with how it went. Mile splits were 6:05, 6:17, 5:55 and 6:12 for that last 0.26 of a mile, meaning we averaged between 6 to 6:10 minute mile pace, and our heart rate averaged 166 beats per minute across that 20-minute section, which is absolutely bang on, spot on. I am over the moon with that, and I'll explain why shortly, because it all falls into place with pacing and heart rate and everything else. So before we dive into today's video, guys, two things. Number one, I'm not a coach, disclaimer, as a lot of you know. This is just to hopefully shed some light on what the whole tempo run terminology means. I, like maybe some of you guys, and maybe even now still some of you guys, was once naive to the whole tempo run, not knowing what it was, and of course made the biggest mistake, which I will talk about very shortly. As I said, I'm sure you know what that is. And I just want to kind of shed some light, as I said, on the whole tempo run thing, how to run them, frequency, all of that good stuff. And number two, if you're excited for this video and want to see more of these types of videos, make sure you hit that like button, comment down below and let me know that you do like it, and if there's anything you'd like me to talk about, of course share it with your friends. And without further ado, let's dive in. Right guys, so what is a tempo run and how fast should you be running your tempo runs at? Well, terminology that I hear banded around and terminology that I've adopted myself is comfortably hard or comfortably uncomfortable. They're great expressions in my opinion because they summarise exactly how you should be running. So not to be confused with a lactate threshold run, which we're not going to go into today. They are not a run at your lactate threshold. They're a run that you're meant to be sitting at just below your lactate threshold, and I will go through with you exactly in detail how mine is structured and then how you guys can work yours out. So for me, I like to do mine based on heart rate. For those of you who don't do heart rate, and you just do pace, then you can work it out based on your 5k time, your most recent 5k time, and add 25 to 30 seconds. That is come from Jack Daniel's running formula book, and that is a formula that has worked out exactly the paces that I've run on. So my recent 5k time, for example, was 5:39, but I know that I can run slightly quicker. We had horrific weather when I did run that, and my time before that was 5:35. So if you add 25 to 30 seconds on from 5:39, you're talking about 6:04 to 6:09 minute mile pace, which is exactly where I hit my tempo run last night. And for those of you who are using heart rate, you end up working out what your lactate threshold is. Mine is 174, and then you want to sit in the zone below that. Now for me, I was sat, as I said, at an average of 166 beats a minute. I was fluctuating anywhere from 163, 64 on the downhills, anywhere up to 168, 169 on the uphills, and that was exactly where I wanted to be. I ended up making sure I only had heart rate on my watch, so I was running specifically in that region, not even looking at pace, and that is just how my pace ended up being. So both of those ways of looking at it are very accurate because they correlate, ended up being the same thing, whether I ran to pace or ran to heart rate. Those things marry up nicely. So that's how you should be running your tempo run. Take your lactate threshold and drop it back a little bit if you're running on pace. If you're doing heart rate, just take your lactate threshold and drop it back maybe 5 to 10 beats a minute. And you'll find that if you run in that zone, you'll understand that whole comfortably uncomfortable thing. You end up feeling like you're running fast, but you're in control and you're able to have sensible thoughts, not like you're losing control of form, not like you're losing control of anything, but everything is nice, under control, form is relaxed, but you are moving at a decent pace. So that for me is how, or that for you guys is how, or what a tempo run is, and then how you should maybe be pacing your tempo runs. And just before we jump into how frequently you should be doing your tempo runs, that leads me on to the biggest mistake that everyone makes when they do tempo runs, including myself, which is we run our tempo runs way too fast. So when I first started running tempo, the word tempo to me, I didn't know any of this terminology. All I did in my first 3 to 6 months with running was basically go out and run as fast as I can every single day, 1, 2, 3 miles, and see if I could get quicker and quicker. Eventually my body broke down, I did some research, and then I learned that actually you need to run easy on a lot of days and then incorporate some sessions and all of that stuff. So as I built up over time, the first thing that I heard was tempo run. I even did videos on tempo runs back in the day in my first year of YouTube, and it was so cringeworthy because the mistake that I said I made was I was running these tempo runs so fast, it was actually at my lactate threshold pace. I was really struggling, positive splitting a lot of them, and actually that's not the whole idea of a tempo run. The tempo run is to get used to running hard and fast, but keeping in control every single time. So that is, without a shadow of a doubt, number one, the biggest mistake that everyone makes with their tempo runs. You see it on Strava or on Facebook or Instagram, whenever someone shares something, they say tempo run, and then you end up seeing their splits and you go, hold on a minute, that's the time you basically just ran a recent 5k. So actually you're almost doing a 5k time trial, or you're only just running a little bit slower than race pace. And here comes the confusion for a lot of people. I think a lot of people label the word tempo, and rightly so. They use the terminology tempo as their lactate threshold, because I know a lot of people who say tempo run is their lactate threshold pace, but actually I like to distinguish the two, as do the majority of runners, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. You have lactate threshold, which is where you're running at your threshold pace, and that's when things get really, really uncomfortable, and then you drop it back a notch and run at your tempo pace. So that, guys, is the number one biggest mistake that everyone makes, including myself, when it comes to tempo runs. Okay guys, so frequency and how often should you be running these things? Well, let's try and break it up for the different types of runners that we have, because I know there are loads of different types of runners there, and not every runner like me works to structured training blocks and training cycles. So let's break it down into 3 sections. Section number 1, we have the runner over here that runs just purely easy, runs for fun, has no pressure, and runs easy and hard. That's all they do. So some runners I know that all they do is 2 different types of runs. They run easy, run hard, then they race. And they get great enjoyment out of that, and that's all they want to do. So that hard ends up being something like a lactate threshold or a tempo run, and in which case you end up wanting to be running hard maybe just the once a week. That's sensible. You don't want to be doing it maybe too much more. Your legs aren't going to be used to sessions if you're predominantly just running at one pace all the time, which is an easier pace, and you just want to ease your body into it. Maybe as you get further down the line and you start enjoying the tempo run, you can start incorporating other types of intervals, but for now, if you're just running easy and running hard once a week is more than adequate. Then you move on to the middle block of people who are maybe dabbling in training, dabbling in intervals, doing some more specific and structured work, but aren't quite ready to commit to maybe a full training block of 12, 16, 20 weeks worth of training. And then maybe they're the type of runner who runs easy, who runs hard, and then maybe mixes it up with a session in between. And if you're that type of runner, then again, once a week is more than adequate, because hopefully what you'll be doing is you'll have some kind of easy run, you'll have some kind of other session, you might then have a tempo run perhaps as maybe a harder workout, and then you'll have a long run on the weekend. And of course you can incorporate your tempo run into the long run on the weekend if you fancy being a little bit daring, and maybe to finish off the last part of your long run at tempo pace, or chuck some tempo intervals within your long run. Either way, it can be incorporated there, and again, once a week is fantastic, just gets your body used to running comfortably hard. Then we move on to the more advanced runner, not advanced in time, but advanced in someone who wants to commit to bigger training blocks, advanced in terms of committing to a structure of training, who might be looking at tackling their first half marathon, and wants to really dive in to learning about the whole phases of training. In which case you have sort of like the build phase, you then work on the real speed and intensity, and then you work some more race specific, and then you have the race, and you break things up in that way. Then you want to be looking at doing a lot of tempo runs in the beginning. So let's say you've got a 20-week training plan for a marathon you've got coming up. The base phase tends to be where you build the foundations, do a lot of foundation work, and you're doing a lot of easy running. And in that space, maybe the first couple of weeks you want to just keep purely easy and nothing else, and then the next 2 weeks of base building, maybe chucking in some tempo runs there, and that's a great place to put them. And then this comes down to terminology, but the middle section where you're doing a lot of shorter, sharper intervals to work on that top end speed. The next phase is the race specific phase. That phase is where you can then start to incorporate tempo runs. I'm going to be a bit pedantic on terminology here. You can call them race pace runs. The longer race you start to run, the more tempo zone you start to fall into. So if I'm doing half marathon pace stuff, then I'm going to be maybe looking at tempo, but more bordering on lactate threshold, because my half marathon pace tends to be closer to sort of literally falls in between lactate threshold and tempo. I tend to run those around 1.7, 2, 3, 4-ish, very close to my lactate threshold. Whereas for a marathon, obviously you want to be running a bit closer to your tempo, maybe even a bit less than that. And so your whole race pace specific workouts, like for a marathon, for example, 3 by 20 minutes, 3 by 50 minutes, 4 by 5k if you're really advanced, that can tend to fall down to tempo pace. I did a tempo run on the channel the other night, where me and Lee were doing tempo pace stuff, because that was just how our bodies were feeling. It can also depend on fatigue and how you're feeling, and if that's all your body can handle. So you can then scatter those throughout the training block, and they tend to go at the beginning and maybe towards the end when you're getting closer to race pace stuff. So in terms of frequency, guys, that's kind of where you should be scattering them in. So hopefully that gives you a good overview of the tempo run, paces, the biggest mistake that we all do, and of course frequency. As I said, I'm not a coach, these are just my opinions. I'd love to hear your thoughts on tempo runs. Do you do them? Are they something you incorporate into your training? And of course, how do you find doing them? Because for me, I absolutely love them. They're a pace that I can sit and hold at and chug away and really enjoy. How do you feel? And of course, if you enjoyed this video, guys, please make sure you leave a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for weekly running content, and comment below with anything you would like me to talk about. More than happy to continue this sort of video on. I'd love to do anything like this. It will be wicked. So there we go, guys. I will see you next time. Until then.